Jimin questions BTS's global direction, forcing the members to confront a painful choice between success, identity, and loyalty. "Stop the music!" Jimin's voice cut through the rehearsal room so sharply that the final electronic beat seemed to collapse in midair. The speakers continued humming for half a second before the sound technician killed the track. Then there was nothing. 7 men stood beneath the white rehearsal lights, breathing hard, their reflections fractured across the wall-length mirrors. Sweat darkened the collars of their shirts. The air smelled of dust, fabric, and the faint metallic heat of overworked equipment. Nobody moved. Jimin was still standing in the center of the formation. His chest rose and fell rapidly. One hand remained curled into a fist beside his thigh. Across from him, Jungkook lowered his arms slowly. "What?" he asked. Jimin looked at him, but the question seemed directed at everyone. "Are we sure this is still us?" The room became colder. Taeyoung's eyebrows drew together. J-Hope glanced toward RM. Jin stopped wiping his face with a towel. Suga, who had been leaning against the mirrored wall, slowly straightened. RM stared at Jimin. "What do you mean?" Jimin swallowed. He had imagined asking the question many times. In hotel rooms, on airplanes, at 3 in the morning when everyone else was sleeping and the city outside their window looked like an endless field of artificial stars. But imagination had never prepared him for the silence that followed. "I mean," Jimin exhaled shakily, "are we changing because we want to grow, or are we changing because the world wants something different from us?" Nobody answered. The question remained suspended between them. Jungkook looked toward the floor. Taeyoung's expression tightened. Suga folded his arms. Jin finally spoke. "Why are you asking this now?" Jimin looked toward the enormous screen mounted on the far wall. The last rehearsal video was still frozen there. 7 silhouettes stood beneath a spectacular stage design. The production was massive. Lasers, fire, giant screens, choreography engineered down to fractions of a second. It looked expensive. It looked powerful. It looked perfect. And somehow, Jimin hated looking at it. "Because when I watched that," he said quietly, "I couldn't recognize what I was feeling." J-Hope frowned. "That's not necessarily a bad thing." "I know." "Then what is it?" Jimin hesitated. "Fear." The word landed harder than anyone expected. Jungkook lifted his head. "Fear?" Jimin nodded. "Not fear of the stage." His eyes moved across the room. "Fear that one day we're going to become so good at giving people what they expect that we'll forget what we actually wanted." Suga looked away. RM's jaw tightened. For a moment, only the ventilation system could be heard. Then the rehearsal room door opened. A staff member stepped inside, holding a tablet. "Sorry," she said carefully. "The international team needs confirmation on the revised set list tonight?" Nobody answered. She looked around. The silence told her immediately that she had walked into something she wasn't supposed to interrupt. "I'll come back." "No," RM said. She stopped. RM looked at Jimin, then at the others. "Stay." The staff member hesitated. Jimin felt his stomach tighten. He had expected an argument among the 7 of them. He had not expected the question to leave the rehearsal room. The staff member approached slowly. "There have been changes requested by the overseas production team. The new version is supposed to be more accessible to international audiences." Jimin gave a faint, humorless smile. "There it is." "What?" "That word. Accessible." Suga looked at him. "You don't like it?" "I don't know anymore." Jin sat down on the floor, his back against the mirror. "Okay," he said. "Then let's stop pretending we're not talking about the same thing." He looked around. "What exactly bothers you?" Jimin stared at his reflection. For years, he had learned how to smile while exhausted. He had learned how to perform through pain. He had learned how to speak carefully because one sentence could become a headline before he finished saying it. But this was different. This wasn't about an interview. It wasn't about fans. It wasn't about a chart. It was about 7 people who had spent too much of their lives together to lie convincingly to one another.
"The new songs," Jimin said. Jungkook's eyes flickered. "The choreography," J-Hope's face changed. "The way we're being told to speak," RM went still. "The way every decision seems to begin with the question, will the international market understand this?" Nobody interrupted. Jimin's voice became softer. "When did we stop asking whether we understood ourselves?" Suga looked down at the floor. The staff member slowly lowered her tablet. "I should probably leave." "No," Suga said. Everyone looked at him. He pushed himself away from the mirror. "Let him finish." Jimin looked at him. Suga rarely said those words. Let him finish. Not because he agreed, not because he disagreed, because he knew what it meant to have a thought trapped inside you until it became heavier than your own body. Jimin nodded. "I don't want to go backwards, that's not what I'm saying." His voice trembled. "I don't want us to pretend the world hasn't changed. I don't want to stop experimenting. I don't want to make the same song forever because it worked once." He took a breath. "But," he looked at Jungkook, "I don't want us to wake up one day and realize we became strangers to ourselves." Jungkook stared at him for several seconds. Then he laughed once. It wasn't amused. It was the kind of laugh people made when someone finally said something they were too afraid to admit. "You know what's weird?" "What?"
I've been thinking about that too. Jimin's eyes widened. Taeyoung looked at Jungkook. "You have?" Jungkook nodded. "Sometimes." He rubbed the back of his neck. "Especially after recording." "Why didn't you say anything?" Jungkook looked at RM. "Because everyone looked happy." The sentence silenced them. RM slowly lowered his gaze. Jungkook continued. "People were congratulating us. The numbers were good. Everyone kept saying how amazing the song sounded. And I was smiling." He paused. "But sometimes after we finished recording, I would sit in the car and listen to our older songs." Taeyoung's expression softened. "Which ones?" Jungkook shrugged. "Doesn't matter." "It matters." Jungkook looked at him. "Some of them." He smiled faintly. "I'd listen and remember how we used to fight over stupid things." Jin laughed under his breath. "We still fight over stupid things. Not like before." The laughter disappeared. Jungkook looked toward the mirrors. "Before, we could argue for 3 hours about one line because all 7 of us cared what that line meant." His voice became quieter. "Now, sometimes we argue about whether people overseas will like the line." Suga closed his eyes. RM rubbed his forehead. J-Hope walked toward the table where several bottles of water had been left. He picked one up but didn't drink. "Maybe that's just what happens when you get bigger," he said. Jimin turned toward him. "Does it have to?" J-Hope looked at him. "I don't know." "That scares me." "I know." J-Hope's voice cracked slightly. Jimin stared at him. J-Hope looked away. "I know because I'm scared too." The room seemed to shrink. 7 people. 1 question. Too many answers. RM finally walked toward the center. He stood beside Jimin. "When did you start thinking this?" Jimin hesitated. "A few months ago." RM frowned. "Months?" Jimin nodded. "Why didn't you tell us?" "Because I didn't want to be the person who ruined everyone's excitement." RM's expression changed immediately. "Jimin." "I know." "No." RM shook his head. "Look at me." Jimin did. "You don't ruin anything by telling us the truth." Jimin's lips parted. RM continued. "Maybe that's exactly what we forgot." For the first time that night, Jimin's eyes filled with tears. He blinked quickly. "I didn't want to make you feel like everything we've achieved isn't enough." RM's voice softened. "You couldn't." Jimin looked down. RM continued. "You think I don't sometimes miss the days when we could walk into a studio with no expectations?" Jin looked at him. RM smiled sadly. "Back then, failure meant nobody listened." He looked around the room. "Now, failure means millions of people might listen and decide they didn't like what they heard." Suga gave a quiet snort. "That's worse." A few of them laughed. The tension broke for only a moment. Then the staff member's tablet vibrated. She looked down. Her expression changed. RM noticed. "What is it?"
She hesitated. "There is another request." "From?" "The international production team." Jimin felt his stomach sink. "What request?" The staff member looked at the screen. "They want to remove one of the Korean tracks from the main set." Nobody spoke. "Which one?" J-Hope asked. She named it. Jimin's face went pale. It was one of the songs they had written years ago, a song that had never been their biggest commercial success, but it had become one of the songs they played whenever they needed to remember why they started. Jungkook stared at the staff member. "They want to remove that?" "Yes." "Why?" "They're trying to make the show more accessible." Suga laughed. This time there was nothing funny about it. "Of course." The staff member looked uncomfortable. "They're trying to make the show more accessible." Jimin looked at Suga. Suga looked back. Neither smiled. RM took the tablet. He read the message. His face became increasingly still. Jin noticed. "What else?" RM didn't answer. "Namjoon?" RM handed the tablet to Jin. Jin read it. His mouth opened slightly. "What the hell?" J-Hope stepped closer. "What?" Jin handed the tablet. The proposed set list was only the beginning. Several songs had been rearranged, some lyrics had been altered, certain introductions had been shortened, the speaking segments were marked with suggested English phrases. Even their spontaneous interaction with the audience had been categorized. One section was labeled "Reduce Cultural References," another "Avoid Extended Korean Dialogue," another "Prioritize Globally Recognizable Emotional Themes." Jimin stared. "It sounds like we're being translated before we even speak." Taeyoung's face hardened. "And who decided that our audience doesn't want to hear us speak Korean?" Nobody answered. Jungkook stepped forward. "Who approved this?" The staff member looked at RM. "Management is aware." Jungkook's jaw tightened. "So everyone knew." "Not everyone, but someone did." "Yes." Jungkook turned away. He walked toward the mirror. His reflection looked older than he felt. Jimin watched him. "Jungkook?" He didn't answer. "Are you okay?" Jungkook nodded. "No." Jimin almost smiled despite himself. "That's honest."
Jungkook looked at him through the mirror. "I don't know what we're supposed to do." Suga spoke from behind them. "Neither do I." Everyone turned. Suga rarely admitted uncertainty. Tonight, it seemed every wall inside the room was beginning to crack. Suga walked toward the center. "Let's be clear." His eyes moved across the group. "None of us hates international success." "No," RM said. "We worked for it." "Yes." "We wanted the world to hear us." "Yes." "So that's not the problem." Suga pointed toward the screen. "The problem is when success becomes the reason we stop making decisions." Jimin nodded slowly. "That." Suga looked at him. "You asked whether BTS is changing too much." He paused. "I think the better question is whether we're still the ones deciding how we change." Nobody spoke. Outside the rehearsal room, footsteps passed through the hallway. Someone laughed. A door slammed. The ordinary world continued. Inside, 7 people stood around a question that had suddenly become much larger than a set list. RM looked at the clock. It was nearly midnight. "Let's go home." Nobody moved. RM picked up his bag. "I vote for food first." J-Hope laughed. "Of course you do. I think better when I'm eating. You think about food when you're sleeping. That too." For a moment, they sounded like themselves again. The staff member quietly left. The lights were dimmed. One by one, the members gathered their belongings. Jimin remained behind. He stood alone in front of the frozen rehearsal footage. The 7 silhouettes on the screen stared back at him. Jungkook approached. "You really meant it?" Jimin didn't turn. "Which part? That you're afraid we won't recognize ourselves?" Jimin's fingers tightened around the strap of his bag. "Yes." Jungkook stood beside him. After a while, he said, "Me too." Jimin looked at him. Jungkook smiled. "But I don't think we're lost." "Why?" "Because you asked." Jimin's eyes softened. Jungkook looked at the screen. "As long as someone is still brave enough to ask, 'Is this us?' I think we're okay." Jimin let out a slow breath. "You make things sound simple. They're not."
Then why do you sound confident? I shrugged. I'm not. Jimin laughed quietly. That makes more sense. They stood together in silence. Then Taeyoung appeared in the doorway. You two coming? Jungkook nodded. Yeah. Taeyoung waited. Jimin looked once more at the screen. Then he reached for the remote. The rehearsal footage disappeared. The screen turned black. For a second, the room reflected only their silhouettes. 7 figures. No stage, no lights, no cameras, no numbers. Just 7 people standing together. Jimin walked toward the door. As they left, he glanced back. The empty rehearsal room seemed strangely peaceful. The question had not been answered. Maybe it didn't need to be answered tonight. For the first time in months, Jimin felt lighter simply because the question no longer belonged only to him. The hallway smelled faintly of rain. Jin was already arguing with J-Hope about where to eat. Taeyoung was laughing. Jungkook was pretending not to listen. Suga walked several steps behind them, hands buried in his pockets. RM slowed until he was beside Jimin. You know, RM said quietly, we don't have to choose between becoming bigger and remaining ourselves. Jimin looked at him. Then what do we choose? RM smiled. We choose every time. Jimin considered that. Then he nodded. Behind them, the rehearsal room lights clicked off. They walked toward the elevator together. The doors opened. All 7 stepped inside. For a few seconds, nobody spoke. Then Jin looked at Jimin. So, Jimin raised an eyebrow. What? Tomorrow? What about tomorrow? Jin smiled. You're explaining to us exactly what you think we should change. Jimin laughed. Me? Yes, you. Why me? Because you started this. Suga glanced over. No. Jin looked at him. No? Suga shook his head. We all started it. The elevator doors closed, and for the first time that night, nobody felt the need to argue. They simply stood shoulder to shoulder as the elevator descended, carrying them away from the rehearsal room and toward a conversation that perhaps should have happened much earlier. Jimin looked at their reflections in the polished metal doors. 7 faces, 7 different fears, 7 different dreams, still together. And somehow, that was enough for tonight.
Elevator doors had barely opened when RM's phone began vibrating violently in his hand, and the expression that crossed his face was enough to make everyone stop laughing. What happened? Jin asked, but RM did not answer immediately. He stared at the screen as if the message had been written in another language, his thumb hovering above it without moving. Jimin noticed the change first. Namjoon, RM finally looked up. The rehearsal video was uploaded. J-Hope frowned. What rehearsal video? The one from tonight. The hallway seemed to narrow around them. Jungkook stepped closer. Uploaded where? RM swallowed. An internal account. Suga's face hardened. That's impossible. Apparently not. Taeyoung took RM's phone before anyone could stop him. His eyes moved rapidly across the screen and the color drained from his face. There are comments. What kind? Jimin asked. Taeyoung looked at him. People are saying we were fighting. We were, Jin muttered. Not like that. Taeyoung turned the phone around. The leaked clip showed only 30 seconds of the rehearsal room, but it contained the most dangerous 30 seconds possible. Jimin's voice was clear. Are we sure this is still us? Then Jungkook's answer. I've been thinking about that too. The clip ended before the conversation could explain itself. The headline attached to the video was brutal. BTS members question whether their music is still themselves as global PRESSURES grow. Min felt the blood leave his face. Who posted it? Unknown account, RM said, already spreading. J-Hope took a step backward. How fast? RM looked at his phone again. Millions of views. Nobody spoke. Jin slowly exhaled. We haven't even gotten home. Suga laughed bitterly. We don't need to go home anymore. Hayoung, Jungkook said. Don't what? Suga snapped. Pretend this isn't exactly what we were worried about. RM raised his voice. Enough. Suga turned toward him. Namjoon, not enough. This is exactly what happens when we start having private conversations about public decisions. Someone always decides they can sell the conversation. Jimin stared at the screen. His own voice was playing again in another clip. Are we sure this is still us? He heard himself say it, and suddenly the words sounded different, not vulnerable, not thoughtful, dangerous. This is my fault, he whispered. Yoongi immediately shook his head. No, I asked the question. And now everyone is talking about it. That doesn't make it your fault. Jimin looked at him. Doesn't it? No, Yoongi stepped closer. You asked us something because you trusted us enough to ask. And now the world knows. The world always finds out eventually. Jimin's eyes filled with tears. That's supposed to make me feel better. No, Yoongi said quietly. I'm just telling you the truth. A second phone began vibrating. Then another. Then another. Jin looked at his screen and grimaced. Mine too. J-Hope's phone lit up with dozens of notifications. RM's expression became increasingly serious as he read. Management wants us back upstairs. Suga looked at him. All of us? All of us. Why? RM hesitated. Emergency meeting. Of course. They returned to the elevator. Nobody joked this time. The ride upward felt longer than the descent. Jimin stood in the corner, staring at the floor. Taehyung stood beside him without speaking. After several seconds, Taehyung quietly reached over and squeezed his wrist. Jimin looked at him. Taehyung said nothing. He didn't need to. The doors opened. The corridor outside was crowded with staff members moving quickly, whispering into phones, carrying laptops and documents. The atmosphere was completely different from an hour earlier. The moment the seven entered the conference room, every conversation stopped. A large screen showed social media posts, news alerts, translated headlines, and reaction videos. Someone had already created graphics using Jimin's words. One headline read, JIMINQUS BTS Westernization. Another read, Is BTS losing its identity? Another was even worse. BTS divided over global success. Jimin stared at the screen. They've turned one sentence into a war. A senior executive sitting at the end of the table looked up. That's why we need to control the narrative. Suga's eyes narrowed. Control? We need a statement. No, Jimin said. The executive looked at him. Excuse me. Jimin's voice was quiet but firm. I don't want a statement written for me. RM immediately looked at him. The executive folded his hands. Jimin, this situation is bigger than any one member. I know. Then you understand why we need to respond. I understand why people want a response. I don't understand why the response has to be decided before we've even talked about what happened. The executive glanced toward RM. This is exactly why internal disagreements should remain internal. Suga leaned forward. Maybe they wouldn't have become public if someone hadn't leaked them. The executive's expression tightened. We are investigating the leak. Good. But right now, the priority is damage control. Damage? Jimin repeated. What exactly is the damage? Nobody answered immediately. Jimin looked around the room. Was the damage that I asked a question or that people heard me asking it? The executive said, the damage is uncertainty. Jimin stared at him. Maybe uncertainty is honest. Honesty doesn't always protect a brand. The room went silent. Yoongi looked up sharply. We're not a brand before we're people. The executive turned toward him. You are both. That's the problem, Yoongi said. RM intervened. Let's slow down. No, Yoongi said. We've been slowing down every time someone asks us to say what they want to hear. His voice grew louder. We need to actually talk. The executive leaned back. Fine, talk. Yoongi looked at Jimin. Tell them. Jimin froze. Tell them what? Everything you told us tonight. Jimin's hands trembled under the table. Yoongi, you wanted us to answer the question. Yoongi looked at the others. So answer it. Jin shifted uncomfortably. J-Hope stared at the table. Taehyung looked between them. Suga was completely still. RM closed his eyes for a moment, then he opened them. Okay. He looked directly at the executive. Let's answer it. The executive frowned. This isn't necessary. It is. RM's voice had changed. It carried the authority of someone who had already made a decision. We're going to talk. Jimin took a breath. I don't think we're changing too much because we're trying new things. I think we're changing too much when we start removing things simply because someone assumes people won't understand them. That's your opinion, the executive said. Yes. Not fact. I know. And the global audience has responded positively to our evolution. Jimin nodded. I know. Then why question it? Jimin looked at him. Because success doesn't automatically mean every decision is right. Suga nodded once. Exactly. The executive looked toward him. And you agree, with what? That the current direction is wrong. Suga's expression hardened. I didn't say that. Then what are you saying? I'm saying we should be allowed to decide what kind of wrong we're willing to risk. The room went silent again. J-Hope finally spoke. Maybe we're all talking past each other. He looked at the screen. There is nothing wrong with wanting global success. There is nothing wrong with changing, but there's something wrong when every creative choice becomes a calculation. RM nodded slowly. That's what we're trying to say. The executive looked at Jin. And you, Jin sighed, I think you're asking the wrong question. What question should we ask? Jin leaned back. Not, will international audiences understand this? Ask, will we still perform this song 5 years from now and feel proud of it? Taehyung smiled faintly. Hyung, Jin shrugged. What? That's actually good. I know, Suga almost smiled, but then the screen changed. A new document appeared, the room fell silent. RM stood immediately. What's that? The executive looked uncomfortable. A proposed strategic direction. For what? For the next phase of BTS's international expansion. Jimin stared at the document. It wasn't a set list. It wasn't a song. It was a long-term plan, new collaborations. More English releases, international producers, fewer Korean language tracks in major campaigns, a stronger emphasis on Western media appearances, a redesigned visual identity, and one sentence near the bottom made Jimin's stomach twist. Minimize cultural barriers that may limit broad international resonance. Taehyung read it twice. Cultural barriers. Suga's expression became cold. They're calling our language a barrier. That's not what it means, the executive said quickly. Then what does it mean? Suga asked. It means accessibility. No, Suga said. It means they want us to remove anything they think requires context. The executive's voice sharpened. We are trying to ensure your longevity. By removing us, Suga asked. Nobody is removing you. Then why does this document sound like a blueprint for making us easier to sell? RM stepped between them. Stop. But Suga was already standing. You want fewer Korean songs. Fine. You want more English interviews. Fine. You want collaborations. Fine. But don't tell me that's the only way forward. No one said that. The document did. The executive looked at RM. You need to manage your members. RM's eyes narrowed. They're not employees I need to manage. You are the leader. I'm aware. Then act like one. Something changed in RM's face. Jimin saw it immediately. The exhaustion behind his eyes disappeared, replaced by something harder. Being the leader doesn't mean telling them to shut up. The executive stared at him. Watch your tone. No, RM's voice remained calm. I'm watching the room. He pointed at the screen. And what I see is a plan that was created without us. It was preliminary. Then why did none of us know? Silence. J-Hope looked toward the executive. Who approved it? The plan is still under review. That's not what I asked. J-Hope's voice was unusually sharp. Who approved it? The executive didn't answer. Jimin felt a strange pressure building in his chest. He knew the 7 of them. He knew when they were angry. He knew when they were afraid, but this was different. This was the moment when anger began turning into betrayal. Jungkook leaned forward. Did you already negotiate contracts based on this plan? The executive remained silent. Jungkook's face changed. You did. Nothing has been finalized. That's not an answer. Jungkook, did you? The executive finally said, preliminary discussions have occurred. Jungkook pushed his chair back. Without us, RM looked at him. Jungkook, without us, he repeated. Nobody answered. He laughed once, but his eyes were wet. That's unbelievable. Jimin reached for his hand under the table. Jungkook squeezed it tightly. We've spent years being told that every decision has to be made together. His voice cracked. But apparently that's only true when we're the ones being asked to work. J-Hope lowered his head. Jin stared at the floor, Taehyung's jaw tight. Suga looked toward RM. Now you understand why I don't trust this process. RM didn't respond. He was staring at the screen. When was this created? Several weeks ago. Jimin's heart sank. Several weeks. He looked at the members. That meant the doubt had been growing inside the company long before tonight. Maybe the meeting wasn't about the leak. Maybe the leak had simply exposed something already happening. Jimin stood. I want to know something. The executive looked at him. What? If we had never seen this document, would you have told us? Silence. Jimin nodded slowly. That's what I thought. The meeting dissolved into chaos. Voices overlapped. Staff members tried to calm everyone. RM demanded copies of every document. Suga demanded to know which producers had been contacted. Jungkook asked why his schedule had already been altered without his approval. J-Hope argued that the choreography changes were not merely artistic adjustments but deliberate attempts to simplify the group's identity. Jin repeatedly asked why nobody had considered asking the members before changing the plan. Taehyung remained unusually quiet until one staff member said, "The international audience may not connect with certain traditional references." Taehyung looked up. "You keep saying the audience like it's one person." The staff member stopped. Taehyung continued, "There are millions of people, they don't all want the same thing. Of course. Then stop using international audience as an excuse for every decision." The room fell silent. Taehyung's voice softened. "Some of our international fans learned Korean because of our songs. Some learned about our culture because they were curious. Some don't understand everything and they still love us. Maybe the answer isn't making everything easier." Jimin watched him. "Maybe," Taehyung said, "the answer is trusting people enough to let them discover something." The executive looked away. The meeting continued for nearly 2 hours. By the end, nothing had been resolved. No statement had been approved. No setlist had been finalized. No one had apologized. But the 7 members left the room knowing something had changed. They walked into a private lounge down the hall. The door closed behind them. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then Suga slammed his phone onto the table. "I'm done." RM looked at him. "With what? Pretending this is normal. It isn't." "Then say it," RM frowned. "Say what?" "Say that you think they're wrong." RM looked at the others. "I think parts of the plan are wrong." Suga shook his head. "That's not what I asked." "Yoongi, you always do this." RM's face hardened. "Do what? Turn everything into diplomacy. Because someone has to." "No, because you're afraid." The room froze. RM stared at him. "What did you say?" Suga stepped closer. "You're afraid that if you fight too hard, you'll become the reason everything falls apart. And you're not?" "Of course I am." "Then don't accuse me of something you're doing too." Suga's eyes flashed. "I'm not pretending otherwise." RM's voice rose. "You think I don't know what's at stake? I think you know exactly what's at stake, and that's why you keep trying to keep everyone calm. Because we're not children. Then stop treating us like we're one argument away from breaking." RM slammed his palm onto the table. "You think I enjoy this?" Nobody moved. "You think I like being the person who has to walk into every room first and figure out how to make 7 different opinions sound like one?" His voice cracked. "I don't." Suga stared at him. RM's eyes were wet now. "I hate it sometimes." The room went quiet. RM turned away. "I miss when we could just make music." Jimin stepped closer. "Namjoon." RM shook his head. "No, let me say it." He wiped his face quickly. "I've spent years trying to protect the group by making sure everyone else is okay, but maybe I've been protecting the wrong thing." Suga's expression softened. "What do you mean?" RM looked at him. "Maybe I've been protecting the idea of BTS instead of protecting the people inside it." Nobody spoke. Jimin felt tears running down his cheeks. He didn't wipe them away. Jungkook looked at RM. "Then let's stop protecting the idea." RM looked at him. "What do you want to do?" Jungkook answered immediately. "Make the music we actually want to make. Even if it costs us something. Yes. Even if people don't like it. Yes. Even if the charts fall." Jungkook hesitated. "Yes." Then Jimin spoke. "Even if we're afraid." Everyone looked at him. Jimin's voice trembled, but he kept going. "I don't think being ourselves means refusing to change. I think it means choosing the changes ourselves." Taehyung nodded. "Then we need to make one decision." Jin looked at him. "What?" Taehyung smiled faintly. "We stop asking what will make everyone happy." J-Hope laughed softly. "That's impossible." "Exactly." They laughed together for the first time since the meeting began, but the laughter didn't last. RM's phone vibrated again. He looked down. His expression changed. "What now?" Jin asked. RM turned the screen toward them. Another leak had appeared. This time it was worse. It contained excerpts from the strategic document. Someone had posted screenshots showing proposed changes to their music and public image. The headline was already spreading. BTS management plans major westernization as members question identity. Jimin stared at the screen. "This isn't random." Suga nodded. "No, someone is feeding this out." "Yes." Jungkook looked around the room. Why? Nobody knew. Then RM noticed something. One of the leaked screenshots contained a tiny identifying mark in the corner, a document code. He zoomed in. Wait, J-Hope leaned closer. What? RM's face became serious. This version was only sent to 5 people. Jin looked at him. 5. Yes, Suga stepped closer. Who? RM's finger hovered over the screen. I need to check the access log. Do it. They crowded around the laptop. RM opened the internal system. Several names appeared, executives, managers, legal staff. One name stood out. Jimin stared at it. His heart began pounding. That can't be right. Yoongi looked at him. What? Jimin pointed at the screen. The name belonged to someone who had been with them for years, someone they trusted, someone who had access to nearly everything. Jin whispered, maybe it's a system error. Suga shook his head. Maybe. RM stared at the access log, or maybe someone wanted us to see this. Jimin looked at him. Why? RM closed the laptop. I don't know. Then open it again. Jimin, open it. RM hesitated. Why? Jimin's eyes hardened. 'Cause if someone is using our disagreement to manipulate us, I want to know before we destroy each other over it. Nobody argued. RM reopened the laptop. The 7 leaned toward the screen. The access history showed repeated activity over the previous month. Documents opened, files downloaded, messages accessed, schedules viewed, but there was one pattern that made RM's expression change. Look at the timestamps. Suga leaned closer. They're all after midnight. Every time. Almost. Jimin felt a chill. Why would someone do that? RM scrolled further. Because they didn't want to be noticed. Suddenly the lights flickered, everyone looked up. The screen went black, the room was silent. Then the emergency lights came on. Jin whispered, okay, that's creepy. J-Hope looked toward the door. Is the power out? A staff member outside shouted that the building system was being reset. Suga stood. We're leaving. RM nodded. They gathered their things. Jimin lingered near the window. The city outside was wet with rain, neon signs reflecting on the streets below. He pressed his palm against the glass. Behind him, Yoongi stopped. You okay? I'm thinking. Dangerous. Jimin smiled faintly. Very. Yoongi stood beside him. What are you thinking about? Whether we were wrong to trust everyone. Yoongi looked out the window. Maybe trust isn't the problem. Then what is? Assuming trust means never questioning someone. Jimin looked at him. Yoongi continued. We can trust people and still ask questions. Jimin nodded slowly. You're right. They walked toward the exit together. The other members were waiting near the elevator. RM looked at them. Tomorrow we meet without management. Suga raised an eyebrow. Where? RM smiled tiredly. Somewhere nobody expects. Jin grinned. Secret meeting. Apparently we're very dramatic now. Taehyung laughed. We always were. The elevator doors opened. They stepped inside. This time nobody talked about the leaked documents. Nobody talked about the headlines. Nobody talked about charts. They simply stood together. When the elevator reached the ground floor, the rain had become heavier. Jin looked outside. We're going to get soaked. J-Hope laughed. You have an umbrella, I know. Then why are you complaining? Because I enjoy complaining. Suga shook his head. At least some things haven't changed. Everyone laughed. Jimin looked around at them. 7 people standing under one umbrella pushing against each other because there wasn't enough room. It was ridiculous. It was ordinary. It was theirs. He smiled. Maybe that's the answer. RM looked at him. What? Jimin looked at the others. If we're scared of changing too much, maybe we should remember what we don't want to lose. Jin raised an eyebrow. Which is? Jimin smiled. This. He gestured toward all of them. The part nobody can manufacture. The rain continued falling around them. For several minutes, they simply stood there, talking over one another, laughing at nothing, arguing about food, complaining about the weather, and refusing to let the night become completely defined by fear. But across the street, beneath the glow of a convenience store sign, a dark figure stood watching the building. The person held a phone. On its screen was a photograph of the 7 members leaving together. A message appeared beneath it. They know about the document. The figure typed a reply. Then moved to the next file. The phone disappeared into a coat pocket. Inside the car waiting nearby, another screen displayed a folder labeled with the group's name. There were dozens of files inside. Contracts, private schedules, creative notes, internal messages, and one file, opened only once, carried a title that had nothing to do with music. It was labeled simply, The Original Plan. Meanwhile, Jimin sat in the back seat of the van between Yoongi and Taehyung, watching rain slide down the window. The city blurred into streaks of silver and gold. His phone kept vibrating, but he didn't check it. For once, he didn't want to know what the world was saying about him. He wanted to hear the voices beside him. Jin was arguing with J-Hope about dinner. Suga was pretending not to care while secretly choosing the restaurant. RM was reading something and occasionally sighing. Taehyung was humming quietly. Jungkook was staring out the opposite window. Jimin smiled. He had no idea what tomorrow would bring. He didn't know who had leaked the documents. He didn't know whether the strategic plan would be abandoned or rewritten. He didn't know whether the world would continue to misunderstand his question. But for the first time since the controversy began, he understood something important. The question wasn't whether BTS could change. They had already changed. The question was whether they could keep changing without losing the reason they had begun. Jimin rested his forehead against the cool glass. "We can do this," he whispered. Jungkook heard him. "What?" Jimin looked at him and smiled. "Nothing." Jungkook smiled back. Outside, the rain softened. Inside the van, 7 voices continued filling the darkness, imperfect and familiar and alive. And somewhere beneath all the noise, Jimin finally understood that perhaps identity was not a fixed place they had to return to. Maybe it was something they built together, choice by choice, song by song, argument by argument, as long as they were brave enough to keep asking each other the questions that hurt. Whoever opened that file knew exactly where to look. RM's voice was barely above a whisper, but inside the dark van, it sounded louder than the rain pounding against the roof. Nobody answered him. The 7 members had been driving for almost 20 minutes since leaving the company building, yet the atmosphere felt as though they had barely moved. The city passed outside in blurred streaks of white, blue, and red, while the interior of the van remained dim except for the glow of phones and the occasional flash of passing headlights. Jimin sat with his hands clasped tightly between his knees, staring at the floor. He could still see the folder on RM's laptop, the original plan. The words had stayed inside his head long after the screen disappeared. "We need to stop talking here," Suga said suddenly. "Why?" J-Hope asked. "Because we don't know who is listening." Jin looked around the van. "You're making this sound like a spy movie. Maybe because it is starting to feel like one." "Hyung." Jungkook's voice was low. "He's right." Jin looked at him. "You too. Did you see how fast the leak spread?" Jungkook asked. "Someone had access." "That doesn't mean someone is listening to us right now." Suga shrugged. "Maybe not." He looked toward the driver. "But we shouldn't assume privacy just because we want it." Driver remained silent, eyes fixed on the road. RM glanced at him through the rearview mirror. "Can you take us somewhere else?" The driver looked surprised. "Where?" RM hesitated. "Anywhere quiet." Jin raised an eyebrow. "That's not suspicious at all." J-Hope almost laughed. "We're 7 grown men asking a driver to take us somewhere secret at 1 in the morning. We're not asking him to hide a body," Jin muttered. "Yet," Suga said. Jin stared at him. "Please don't say things like that." A small laugh moved through the van, but it disappeared quickly. RM looked at his phone again. The leaked document was still circulating. Thousands of comments were appearing every minute. Some fans were furious. Others defended the group. Some accused Jimin of complaining about international success. Others accused management of trying to erase the group's identity. A few headlines claimed the members were preparing to leave. Another claimed BTS was secretly divided. One particularly aggressive article suggested that Jimin and Suga were leading an internal rebellion. Jimin read it once and locked his phone. "They don't know anything," he whispered. Taehyung looked at him. "That's never stopped anyone." Jimin smiled weakly. "I know. Then don't read it." "I shouldn't." "You will. Probably." Taehyung leaned his head against the seat. "Me too." They fell silent. After several minutes, the van stopped beneath an old apartment building that belonged to someone RM trusted. The members entered through a side entrance, wearing caps and masks, avoiding the main street. The building was quiet, too quiet. The elevator smelled faintly of detergent and old concrete. When the doors opened, they entered a small apartment with a living room barely large enough for all 7 of them. Jin immediately looked around. "This is tiny." "It's temporary," RM said. "I like it," Jimin replied. "It feels normal." Suga dropped his bag on the floor. "Good, because we're going to need normal." They gathered around the low table. RM placed his laptop in the center but didn't open it yet. Before we look at anything else, he said, we need to agree on something. J-Hope crossed his arms. What? No one leaves this room angry. Suga looked at him. That's impossible. Then try. Jin nodded. He's right. RM looked around. We've spent years learning how to perform together. Maybe we need to learn how to disagree together. Jimin lowered his gaze. What if we don't agree? Then we don't agree. What if someone wants something completely different? RM answered quietly. Then we listen. Jungkook looked at him. Even if it hurts, especially then. Suga leaned back. Fine. He looked at the others. I'll start. Everyone turned toward him. I think the current direction is dangerous. J-Hope frowned. Dangerous. Why? Because we've become too comfortable letting other people define what our music should mean. He tapped his fingers against the table. We used to fight over every detail. Now we receive a finished strategy and are expected to discuss whether we can make it work. Jin nodded slowly. That's true. But, Suga continued, I also don't think we should romanticize the past. Jimin looked at him. What do you mean? We weren't perfect then. No, we fought because we were exhausted. We made terrible decisions. We were broke. We had no idea what we were doing. A faint smile appeared on his face. Sometimes I miss that stupidity. Jin laughed. You still have it. Thanks. You're welcome. The room softened for a moment. Suga's expression became serious again. The point is, we shouldn't go backward. We should go forward without surrendering control. RM nodded. I agree. J-Hope looked thoughtful. I agree too, but I have a different fear. What? Taehyung asked. J-Hope stared at his hands. I'm afraid that if we push back too hard, people will think we're ungrateful. Jimin looked at him. Why would they? Because we've been given opportunities other artists would dream about. J-Hope swallowed. Sometimes I worry that questioning anything makes us look spoiled. Jin's expression softened. Hoseok. I'm serious. J-Hope looked up. I know what we have. I know how much people helped us. I know how many fans waited for us. I don't want to become arrogant. Wanting a voice isn't arrogance, RM said. Maybe. J-Hope looked at him. But there's another thing. What? What if the people who are pushing these changes aren't completely wrong? Nobody answered. J-Hope continued. What if the international market really does respond better to certain sounds? What if more English songs really do reach more people? What if changing our choreography makes performances easier to understand? What if all of this actually works? Jimin watched him carefully. Then we can choose those things. J-Hope frowned. What? We don't have to reject every change just because we didn't choose the original reason behind it. J-Hope stared at him. Jimin continued. If an English song feels right, we make it. If a collaboration excites us, we do it. If a different sound makes us curious, we try it. But we shouldn't do something only because someone tells us it will make us more acceptable. J-Hope nodded slowly. That's different. Yes. But can we actually tell the difference? Jimin didn't answer immediately. Maybe that's what we have to figure out. Taehyung leaned forward. I think I know when it feels wrong. Jin smiled. You do? Yes. How? Taehyung looked serious. When I'm recording something and I stop thinking about the song and start thinking about how people will react. Suga nodded. That's a good sign. Taehyung laughed softly. It's not a good sign, it's exhausting. Exactly. Jungkook finally spoke. For me, it's different. Everyone looked at him. I don't always know what I want. He paused. That's the truth. Jimin's expression softened. You don't have to. I know. Jungkook rubbed his palms together. But when people ask me what kind of artist I want to be, sometimes I feel like I'm supposed to have an answer. You don't, Jin said. You're allowed to discover it. I know that too, Jungkook smiled. But knowing something and feeling it are different, RM nodded. Very different, Jungkook looked down. Sometimes I worry that because I started so young, I learned how to become what people needed before I learned what I needed. The room went completely silent. Jimin felt something break inside his chest. He remembered Jungkook as a teenager, standing in rehearsal rooms with oversized clothes, nervous hands, determined eyes. He remembered the years of pressure. Jungkook, Jimin said quietly. Jungkook looked up. What? You don't owe anyone a finished version of yourself. Jungkook's eyes became wet. He looked away. Don't make me cry. Jimin laughed softly. I'm trying. You're bad at it. I know. Jin reached over and pushed a box of tissues toward him. There. Jungkook stared at the box. Why are you like this? Because I'm the oldest. That explains nothing. It explains everything. They laughed again. But the laughter was interrupted by a sound from RM's laptop. A notification. Everyone froze. RM opened it. A new file had appeared in his inbox. No sender, no subject, just an attachment. Suga immediately stood. Don't open it. RM stared at the screen. Why? Because that's how people get hacked. Jin's eyes widened. You watch too many movies. No, Suga pointed at the laptop. We already know someone is leaking information. Don't open an unknown file. RM closed the message. He's right. Jimin looked at the screen. Can we trace it? Maybe. RM took a photograph of the screen with his phone, then shut the laptop. We'll deal with it later. What if it's important? J-Hope asked. Then whoever sent it can send it again. The room settled back into uneasy silence, but something had changed. They were no longer discussing music alone. There was another force moving around them, invisible but increasingly obvious. Someone wanted something. The question was what? 2 hours passed. They discussed songs, old albums, unreleased demos, lyrics they had abandoned, ideas they had never dared to suggest. At one point, Jin pulled out a notebook and started writing. What are you doing? Taehyung asked. Making a list. Jimin smiled. You know we're not supposed to make lists. We're making music, not breaking rules. Still, Jin looked at him. What? Nothing. They continued. RM suggested revisiting an unfinished song from years earlier. J-Hope wanted to combine traditional instruments with modern production. Suga wanted something rawer. Taehyung wanted a track that felt almost cinematic. Jungkook wanted to sing without worrying about technical perfection. Jimin wanted a song that sounded vulnerable. For the first time in weeks, they were speaking about music without using the words market, chart, campaign, global, accessible, or international. It felt strange. It felt freeing. Then Suga said something that stopped everyone. We should make one song that nobody expects. RM looked at him. How unexpected, Suga smiled. Enough to scare us. J-Hope laughed. That sounds expensive, probably, and controversial, definitely. Jin looked at Jimin. You're smiling. Jimin hadn't realized he was. Maybe I like the idea. Jungkook leaned forward. What kind of song? Suga shook his head. We don't know yet. Taehyung smiled. Good. They began throwing ideas around. It became chaotic quickly. Someone suggested using old recordings. Someone else suggested a live band. J-Hope wanted dancers from different styles. Jin suggested beginning with silence. Everyone laughed. Why silence? Jin asked. Because nobody expects silence in a BTS song. He's right, RM said. We could start with breathing. Jimin looked at him. That sounds beautiful. Then the first sound is breathing, RM said. Then what? Jimin closed his eyes. He imagined an empty stage. 7 people. No screens, no fireworks, no translation, just voices. A Korean sentence, he said. Everyone looked at him. No translation at first. Suga smiled. Interesting. Then the music begins. J-Hope nodded. And later we bring in English. Jungkook added, not because we have to, because the song needs it. Jimin opened his eyes. Exactly. They looked at each other. For a few seconds the room was completely still. Something had clicked. Then RM smiled. Maybe that's the song. Suga shook his head. No, that's the beginning. Jimin felt a strange excitement in his chest. Then we keep going. But before they could, RM's phone rang. He looked at the caller ID. His face changed. Who is it? Jin asked. The company. At this hour, apparently, RM answered. He listened silently, then his expression became increasingly tense. What? Jimin asked after he hung up. RM looked at them. They know we're here. Everyone froze. How? Jungkook asked. They didn't say. Suga stood. We're leaving. Wait. No, Suga grabbed his jacket. If they know where we are, we don't know how. Jin's face went pale. You think someone followed us? I don't know. Suga looked toward the windows. That's the problem. RM checked the door. Everyone stay together. J-Hope whispered, this is getting ridiculous. Taehyung looked at him. Maybe. No, seriously, we can't even meet privately, Suga answered. Not if someone is monitoring our schedules. Jimin's heart was pounding. Maybe they tracked the van. Maybe. Then why didn't they stop us? Nobody had an answer. A knock came at the door. Everyone froze. 3 slow knocks. Jin whispered, who is it? No response. Another 3 knocks. Suga motioned for everyone to move away from the door. RM approached carefully. Who? A familiar voice answered. It's me. RM's expression changed. He opened the door. A senior manager stood outside, soaked from the rain. He looked exhausted. You need to come back. RM stared at him. Why? There's been another leak. Suga stepped forward. What this time? The manager looked at the 7 members. Something much worse. Jimin felt his stomach drop. What? The manager held out his phone. Someone leaked internal messages between executives discussing the group. RM took it. He read silently, then his face hardened. This isn't real. It is. Who confirmed it? Legal. J-Hope looked over RM's shoulder. The messages were short, cold, clinical. They discussed members individually. Their strengths, weaknesses, public image, market value, risk factors. One line made Jimin's breath stop. Jimin's emotional sensitivity may become a liability if narrative control is lost. He read it again. His hands started shaking. Jungkook saw the screen. Give me that. Jimin stepped backward. No. Jungkook looked at him. Jimin, no. He turned away. His throat burned. Another line described Jungkook as highly marketable but psychologically vulnerable to external pressure. Taehyung was described as artistically unpredictable. Suga was difficult to influence. RM was essential but prone to internal conflict. J-Hope was highly cooperative. Jin was valuable for stability. They weren't people in those messages. They were categories, assets, risks, variables. Jimin felt sick. They've been talking about us like this. The manager looked down. Not everyone, but someone. Yes, Jimin laughed bitterly. So this is what we are. No. Then why does it say it? Because some people think strategically. Suga stepped forward. Don't defend them. The manager looked at him. I'm not. Then tell us the truth. I don't know everything. Find out. The manager's face tightened. You think I haven't tried? Suga stared at him. Then try harder. RM raised his hand. Stop. He looked at the manager. Who leaked these? We don't know. And who wrote them? We know which department they came from. Which? The manager hesitated. Global strategy. Jimin closed his eyes. The room felt suddenly too small. So it is about the international expansion plan. Probably. Jimin opened his eyes. You're telling us someone has been discussing our weaknesses behind closed doors, leaking our private conversations, and now you're saying probably. The manager looked ashamed. I don't have all the answers. Then why are you here? Jimin asked. The manager looked directly at him. Because someone inside the company wants you to believe management is the enemy. Silence. Suga narrowed his eyes. What? There are people benefiting from this chaos. RM stepped closer. Who? The manager shook his head. I don't know. You came here to tell us that someone is manipulating us, but you don't know who. I know enough to be worried. That's not enough. It may be all I can safely tell you. Jimin stared at him. Safely? The manager looked toward the hallway. Yes. Nobody moved. Why? Jimin whispered. The manager's expression was grim. Because I don't think the leaks are about money. Suga's face changed. Then what are they about? The manager looked at the 7 members. Control. The word seemed to drain the warmth from the room. Control over what? RM asked. The next version of BTS. Nobody spoke. The manager continued. There are people who believe the group has reached a point where individual members should no longer influence strategic direction. Jimin's heart sank. What does that mean? It means they believe the members should perform the plan, not create it. Jungkook clenched his fists. That's insane. Maybe. No, it is. Jimin looked at RM. RM looked back. They both understood the same thing. This wasn't just an argument about songs anymore. Someone had made a decision about what BTS was supposed to become. The manager stepped backward. I shouldn't be here. Suga asked. Why did you come? He paused. Because I've watched you for too many years to stand by while someone turns you into something you didn't choose. Then he left. The door closed. Nobody spoke for a long time. Finally Jin said, I hate tonight. J-Hope nodded. Me too. Taehyung sat down slowly. Jungkook looked at Jimin. Are you okay? Jimin shook his head. No. Do you want to talk? Not yet. Jungkook nodded. He didn't push. RM sat at the table. We need to make a decision. Suga looked at him. Which one? Whether we confront this publicly. No. Suga answered immediately. RM frowned. Why? Because we don't know enough. People are already talking. Let them? That's easy for you to say. Suga's eyes flashed. Don't what? Don't pretend silence isn't a choice. RM stared at him. It is. Then choose it, and let rumors define us, better than letting panic define us. J-Hope stepped between them. Guys, neither stopped. RM said, if we say nothing, people will assume we're fighting. Suga answered, if we say too much, someone will use it against us. Then what? We tell the truth when we know it. And when will that be? Suga's voice softened. When we're ready, RM looked away. Jimin watched them. He suddenly realized something. They were arguing about strategy, but underneath it was fear. RM feared silence. Suga feared manipulation. J-Hope feared appearing ungrateful. Jungkook feared losing himself. Taehyung feared being misunderstood. Jin feared the group losing its warmth. And Jimin feared that his question had opened a door that could never be closed. He stood. "I think I know what we should do." Everyone looked at him. "What?" "Nothing." They stared. Jimin continued. "Not yet." Suga nodded slowly. "Exactly." Jimin took a breath. "We don't respond to every headline. We don't fight through interviews. We don't release a statement written by someone else." RM listened. "Then, we make the song." J-Hope smiled. "The one that scares us." Jimin nodded. "The one that sounds like us." Jungkook smiled. "And if they tell us they don't want it?" Jimin looked at him. "Then we decide what matters more." "What?" "Being successful." He paused. "Or being able to live with what we succeeded at." Nobody answered. The silence was different now. It wasn't empty, it was agreement. RM opened his laptop. "Then let's write." Suga pulled out his notebook. J-Hope sat beside him. Taehyung moved toward the piano. Jin found a guitar leaning against the wall. Jungkook took off his jacket. Jimin stood in the center of the room. No stage lights. No producers. No executives. No cameras, just them. Taehyung played 3 quiet notes. Jimin closed his eyes. Jungkook began humming. J-Hope tapped a rhythm against the table. Suga wrote something down. RM listened. Jin added a soft chord. The first melody was imperfect. Then another. Slowly something emerged. It wasn't designed for a market. It wasn't designed for a chart. It wasn't designed to prove anything. It was simply honest. Jimin opened his eyes. Again. They played it again. Slower. They tried again. "No," Suga said. "Keep the mistake." Jimin looked at him. "What?" "Your voice cracked." "I heard it. Keep it." Jimin smiled. "Why?" Suga looked at him. "Because that's what you sound like when you mean something." Jimin's eyes burned. "Okay." They played again. Hours passed. Outside, the rain stopped. Dawn began appearing behind the windows. Nobody noticed. The city slowly changed from darkness to gray. Their song grew with it. At one point, Jungkook stopped singing. Jimin looked at him. "What's wrong?" Jungkook shook his head. "Nothing. You're crying, I know." "Why?" Jungkook smiled through tears. "Because I forgot what this felt like." Jimin walked over and hugged him. One by one, the others joined. 7 bodies crowded together in the tiny apartment, laughing and crying and complaining that someone was stepping on someone's foot. It was messy. It was uncomfortable. It was ridiculous, and it felt real. When they finally separated, Jin wiped his eyes and immediately pointed at everyone. "Nobody tells anyone I cried." J-Hope laughed. "Too late. I'm serious. We all saw you." "That doesn't count." Suga smiled. "It absolutely counts." Jin glared at him. "Traitor." RM laughed. The tension finally broke. Jimin looked around the room. The sun was rising. The first light touched their faces. He realized he no longer wanted to ask whether BTS was changing too much. The answer was more complicated. They were changing. They had to change. They were older. Their music was changing. Their lives were changing. Their audience was changing. But there was one thing they could still control. They could decide why. Jimin sat beside Jungkook and listened to the rough recording they had made on a phone. It wasn't perfect. The timing wasn't perfect. The vocals weren't polished. The instruments weren't mixed. But when the final note disappeared, nobody spoke. Then RM whispered, "That's us." Jimin smiled. "Yeah," Suga nodded. "For now." Jimin looked at him. "For now," Suga smiled faintly. "We're always changing." Jimin understood. The goal wasn't to freeze BTS in the past. The goal was to make sure that every version of them still belonged to them. He leaned back against the wall, exhausted. Around him, the others were slowly falling asleep. Jin had curled up with a pillow. J-Hope was sitting with his eyes closed. Taehyung was staring quietly through the window. Jungkook had fallen asleep beside Jimin, his head resting against the back of the couch. RM was still awake, reading the lyrics. Suga sat near the window, watching the sunrise. Jimin looked at them and felt something inside him settle. The controversy would continue. The leaks would continue. The headlines would change. People would argue. Some would accuse them. Some would defend them. Some would insist they knew what BTS should become. But inside this small room, they had found something more valuable than an answer. They had found a choice. And when the morning finally arrived, Jimin closed his eyes, listening to the soft breathing of the people beside him. and for the first time since he had asked that frightening question, he didn't feel afraid of the future. He was still uncertain. He was still tired. He still had no idea who was behind the leaks or how far the manipulation went. But he knew that whatever happened next, he wouldn't have to face it alone. The seven of them had argued, doubted, shouted, cried, and questioned everything. Yet somehow, after all of it, they were still sitting in the same room, listening to the same unfinished song. Jimin smiled faintly as sunlight filled the apartment. Maybe that was what identity really meant. Not staying unchanged. Not refusing the world. Not hiding from growth. Maybe it meant looking at one another when everything became complicated and asking, again and again, is this still us? And having the courage to listen to the answer together. Delete the song. The voice came from the doorway, and every member of BTS froze as though someone had fired a gun into the quiet morning. Jimin's eyes opened instantly. Jungkook lifted his head from the couch. RM slowly lowered the notebook in his hands. Suga turned toward the sound without saying a word. The senior executive standing in the doorway looked exhausted, but there was nothing tired about his eyes. They were cold, focused, and frighteningly certain. "What did you say?" RM asked. The executive stepped inside and closed the door behind him. "I said delete the song." Jimin stood. "You heard it. I heard enough." "How?" Suga demanded. "Someone sent me the recording." Jungkook looked toward the phone lying on the table. "Who? That doesn't matter." "It matters to us," Jungkook snapped. The executive looked at him. "You don't understand the situation you're in." Suga laughed bitterly. "No, I think we understand it perfectly." "Do you?" The executive placed a tablet on the table. "Then perhaps you should look at this." RM reached for it. The screen displayed a series of headlines, market reports, social media analysis, and internal projections. "What am I looking at?" "The consequences of the last 48 hours. RM scrolled. "The rumors are affecting the upcoming campaign." "Of course they are. Sponsors are asking questions. That's their right. Distribution partners are nervous. And there are concerns about whether BTS is still aligned with the strategy required for the next phase." Jimin felt something cold move through his chest. "The strategy." He repeated the word quietly. "You mean the strategy we were never shown?" The executive ignored him. "The song you're working on cannot be released." Suga stepped forward. "It isn't finished." "Exactly. Then why are you afraid of it?" The executive's eyes narrowed. "Because it is irresponsible." "Why?" "Because it is emotional." Suga stared at him. "That's your objection. It's not commercially disciplined." Jimin felt his hands begin to shake. "You haven't even heard the final version." "I've heard the demo." "Then you heard nothing." "I heard enough." "No," Jimin said. "You heard a song that wasn't made for you." The executive looked directly at him. "That attitude is precisely the problem." The room became silent. Jimin took one step forward. "What attitude?" "The belief that because you're artists, you are entitled to ignore the business reality surrounding you." Jimin's eyes hardened. "We know there's a business." "Do you?" "Yes." "Then act like it." RM stood between them. "Stop." The executive looked at him. "You should be the one convincing them." "Convincing them of what?" "That this is bigger than personal feelings." RM's expression changed. "You keep saying that, because it's true." "No," RM replied. "It's convenient." The executive's jaw tightened. "Be careful." "I've been careful for years." RM's voice was calm, but something underneath it had begun to burn. "That's why we're here." The executive stared at him. "You think I'm your enemy." "I don't know what you are." RM glanced at the tablet. "That's the problem." The executive's face remained unreadable. "You need to understand something. BTS isn't 7 individuals making decisions whenever they feel emotionally inspired. You are a global operation." Jin, who had been silent until then, suddenly laughed. It was a short, humorless sound. "A global operation." He shook his head. "That's what we're calling ourselves now, Jin." "No," Jin stood. "Let me speak." The executive looked at him. "Go ahead." Jin's voice was quiet. "When we started, we weren't a global operation. We were 7 people trying not to fail." He smiled sadly. "We ate cheap food. We practiced until our bodies hurt. We argued over songs because we thought every song might be the one that decided whether anyone remembered us." He looked at the executive. "And somehow we became this." He gestured toward the tablet. "Charts, campaigns, projections, market segments." He swallowed. I understand why those things matter, but if you remove the people from the center of it, what exactly are you protecting? Nobody answered. Jin continued. The numbers, he shook his head. Numbers don't cry in rehearsal rooms. J-Hope lowered his eyes. Taehyung stared at Jin with a mixture of admiration and sadness. The executive sighed. You're being emotional, Jin smiled. Yes, that's exactly the problem. Jin's smile disappeared. Then maybe your problem isn't with our music. He stepped closer. Maybe your problem is that we're still human. The executive looked at him for several seconds. You have no idea what is at stake. Jin's eyes flashed. Then tell us. I just did. No, you showed us numbers. Pointed toward the tablet. I want the truth. The executive remained silent. Jimin watched him carefully. Something about the silence felt wrong. It wasn't the silence of someone who didn't know. It was the silence of someone deciding how much he could safely reveal. What aren't you telling us? Jimin asked. The executive looked at him. Nothing. You're lying. The room froze. Jimin hadn't meant to say it that directly, but the words were already out. The executive stared at him. Excuse me. Jimin's heart hammered against his ribs. You know more about the leaks than you're telling us. That's an accusation. Yes, be careful. Everyone keeps telling me that. Jimin's voice cracked. Maybe that's why I'm finally tired of being careful. Jungkook moved beside him. He's not alone. Taehyung stood too. J-Hope followed. Jin crossed his arms. Suga remained near the table, watching. RM looked at all 6 members, then back at the executive. We're listening. The executive's face hardened. Think this is a game? No, RM said. We think someone is trying to force us into a decision. And you think the company is behind it. I think someone is. That's a dangerous assumption. So is trusting everyone. The executive took a slow breath. Fine. He reached into his jacket and removed a small drive. You want the truth? He placed it on the table. Watch this. Nobody moved. What is it? J-Hope asked. Security footage. Suga immediately looked at RM. From where? Company building. Of what? The executive looked at Jimin. The night the first rehearsal was leaked. Jimin felt his stomach tight. RM picked up the drive. Why are you giving us this? Because I want you to understand that the person you're looking for isn't who you think. Suga's eyes narrowed. Who did we think? The executive looked at him. You thought management was trying to silence you. And we aren't. Then who is? The executive didn't answer. RM connected the drive to the laptop. A video appeared. Grainy security footage showed the corridor outside the rehearsal room. The timestamp was visible. It was the exact night Jimin had asked his question. They watched in silence. People moved through the hallway. Staff members entered and left. Nothing unusual. Then, nearly an hour after the rehearsal ended, someone appeared. The figure wore a dark coat and cap. Their face was partially hidden. They stopped outside the rehearsal room. Looked around, entered, stayed inside for several minutes, then left carrying something. Jimin leaned closer. Can you zoom in? RM did. The image blurred, but one detail became visible, a badge around the person's neck. That's an internal badge, J-Hope said. Yes, Suga's eyes narrowed. Can you identify the number? RM enhanced the image. The number became visible. Jin stared at it. That's, he stopped. Jimin looked at him. What? Jin didn't answer. Hyung. Jin looked at RM. That badge belongs to someone on the executive floor. The room became completely still. The executive nodded. Yes. Who? RM asked. The executive hesitated. The head of international strategy. Jimin's breath caught. The same department behind the expansion plan. Yes, Suga stepped forward. And you're telling us this isn't the company. I'm telling you one person may be acting outside the agreed process. One person. We don't know yet. RM paused the video. Then why did you come here alone? The executive looked at him. Because I wanted to give you a chance to decide what you do before the company decides for you. Jimin stared at him. What does that mean? There is a board meeting tonight. RM's face changed. Tonight? Yes. About us? About the future direction of BTS. And we're not invited. No, Suga laughed. Of course. The executive continued. There is a proposal to restructure creative authority. J-Hope looked confused. What kind of restructuring? The members would retain performance rights, but strategic creative decisions would move to a central committee. Jungkook stood so quickly that his chair fell backward. What? It's still a proposal. But you're considering it. The board is considering it. Without us. Yes. Jungkook's eyes filled with anger. Then what's the point of everything we just said? That's why I'm here. The executive looked at RM. You have until the meeting to decide whether you want to formally oppose the proposal. RM stared at him. And if we do, then things become complicated. Suga smiled coldly. They're already complicated. You could lose certain privileges. Jin frowned. What privileges? Approval over some projects, certain scheduling decisions, some international partnerships. And if we don't oppose, the restructuring will probably pass. Jimin felt dizzy. So this is the choice. Yes. Either we fight or we surrender control. The executive didn't respond. Jimin looked at the others. RM's face was pale. Suga looked furious. J-Hope was biting the inside of his cheek. Taehyung stared at the floor. Jin's hands were shaking. Jungkook looked as though he wanted to scream. Need air, he said. He walked toward the door. Jimin followed. Jungkook, don't, please. Jungkook stopped in the hallway. His eyes were red. I can't breathe. Jimin stood beside him. I'm here. What if we lose? Then we lose together. Jungkook laughed bitterly. That's easy to say. I know. What if everything changes? It already has. Jungkook looked at him. What if this is the moment we break? Jimin's heart hurt. Then we hold on. What if holding on isn't enough? Jimin took his hand. Then we figure out how to rebuild. Jungkook looked down at their hands. I hate this. Me too. I wish you never asked that question. Jimin's eyes widened. Jungkook immediately looked guilty. I didn't mean no, Jimin swallowed. It's okay. I know. I was angry. I know. Jungkook looked at him. But sometimes I think everything was easier before you asked. Jimin nodded slowly. Maybe. He looked toward the window. But maybe easier wasn't better. Jungkook's eyes filled again. You really believe that? I have to. Why? Jimin looked at him. Because if I don't, then all of this pain means nothing. Jungkook stared at him. Then he pulled Jimin into a hug. Neither spoke. Inside the apartment, the others were arguing. Their voices became louder. You can't expect us to make a decision in a few hours, J-Hope shouted. The executive answered, you have more information than most artists ever receive. That's not the point. Then what is? The point is that this is our life. And millions of people depend on this operation. Suga's voice cut through them. Stop using fans as a weapon. Silence. What? The executive asked. Suga stepped forward. Every time someone disagrees, you talk about the fans, the market, the employees, the company, everyone except us. Because you are not the only people affected. We know, Suga's voice was low, but we are the people standing on the stage. RM looked at him. Yoongi. No, Suga shook his head. I'm done apologizing for wanting a voice. The executive stared at him. You think this is about your voice? Yes, it's about stability. No, Suga pointed toward the laptop. It's about control. The executive's face changed. You should be careful with accusations. And you should be careful with assumptions. J-Hope stepped between them. Enough. Suga looked at him. What? We're angry. Yes, but we need to think. Suga exhaled. Fine. RM closed the laptop. We're going to the board meeting. Everyone looked at him. The executive seemed surprised. You're sure? Yes. Jimin and Jungkook returned to the room. What did we decide? Jimin asked. RM looked at him. We're going to the meeting. Jimin stared. All of us. Jungkook nodded. Good. Jin looked at the executive. And we're bringing the song. The executive frowned. What? Jin smiled. You heard me. J-Hope laughed. He's serious. Very. Taehyung picked up his phone. We have a rough recording. Suga nodded. And we're going to play it. The executive shook his head. That isn't appropriate. RM looked at him. Neither is deciding our future without us. Nobody spoke after that. The journey to the company was silent. The sun was high now, but the city felt darker than it had before. Reporters had gathered outside the building. Cameras flashed. Security created a path. Questions exploded around them. Jimin, are BTS members fighting? Jungkook. Is the group planning to leave? RM, are the leaked documents real? Suga, are you against the company's international strategy? Jimin heard his name shouted repeatedly. He looked down and kept walking. Jungkook reached for his sleeve. Jimin looked at him. Jungkook gave him a small nod. Keep going. They entered the building. The boardroom was already full. Executives, legal representatives, strategy directors, financial officers. People Jimin had seen many times but rarely spoken to directly. At the head of the table sat the chairman. He looked at the 7 members for several seconds. Sit. They sat. RM placed the laptop on the table. Suga placed the drive beside it. Jimin placed the phone containing their unfinished song in the center. The chairman looked at it. "What's that?" "Our music," Jimin said. The chairman frowned. "We're discussing strategy." "So are we." The chairman folded his hands. "I understand there has been tension." "That's one word for it," Jin muttered. The chairman ignored him. "The company wants what is best for BTS." Suga leaned forward. "Then ask BTS what is best for BTS." "That's what this meeting is about." RM shook his head. "No, this meeting is about whether you can take creative authority away from us." The chairman's expression hardened. "That's not the proposal." "Then what is?" The strategy director spoke. "The proposal is to establish a centralized committee responsible for global consistency." Jimin asked, "Consistency of what?" "Brand messaging, musical positioning, visual direction." "International partnerships." Jimin nodded. "So everything." "Not everything. Most things." "The committee would work collaboratively." Suga laughed. "Collaboratively." He looked around the table. "Funny word." The strategy director frowned. "You seem determined to misunderstand. And you seem determined to redefine." RM raised his hand. "We need specifics." A document was distributed. RM read it. His expression became increasingly grim. "This says members would need committee approval for major international releases." "Correct." "Collaborations." "Correct." "Some solo activities, certain strategic activities." Jungkook looked up. "No." Everyone turned toward him. "Absolutely not." The chairman said. "Jungkook." "No." Jungkook's voice shook. "You don't get to tell me what I can create. We are not restricting creativity. You're restricting decisions. For the sake of the group." Jungkook slammed his hand on the table. "Stop saying that." The room went silent. His eyes were wet. "Stop saying everything is for the group when you're asking us to give up pieces of ourselves." The chairman stared at him. Jungkook continued. "I've spent my entire life being told what to do for the group. Practice, record, perform, travel, smile, speak, wait. Now you're telling me that when I finally know what I want to create, someone else gets to decide whether it's acceptable." Jimin reached for his hand. Jungkook squeezed it. "I can't do that anymore." The chairman's expression softened slightly. "You're emotional." Jungkook laughed through tears. "Yes." He looked around the room. "I'm emotional because this is my life." Nobody spoke. Jimin stood, "And that's exactly why the song exists." He pressed play. The room filled with silence first, then breathing, then a quiet Korean phrase, then Taehyung's first note. Jimin's voice entered softly. Jungkook followed. The melody grew. There was no explosive production. No obvious attempt to impress, just 7 voices gradually joining. The song sounded vulnerable, human, imperfect. When it ended, the room remained silent. The chairman looked down. The strategy director shook his head. "It's not commercially competitive." Jimin stared at him. "You heard the whole thing and that's what you decided?" "Yes." "Not whether it moved you." "That isn't the question." Jimin's voice cracked. "Maybe that's the problem." The chairman looked at him. "Jimin." "No." Jimin's eyes filled with tears. "You asked us to become bigger. We did. You asked us to reach more people. We did. You asked us to change. We did. But now you're asking us to disappear inside the changes." His voice trembled. "And I'm sorry, but I don't know how to do that." Taehyung stood beside him. "Neither do I." J-Hope stood. "Neither do I." Jin followed. "Me neither." Suga rose. "Absolutely not." Jungkook stood. "No." RM remained seated for a moment. He looked at the chairman. Then at the document. Then at the 6 members standing beside him. Finally he stood. "No." 7 voices had become one. The chairman leaned back. "You understand the consequences?" RM nodded. "Yes. The board may reject your position. Then they reject it. Sponsors may reconsider. Then they reconsider. Markets may react negatively." RM's voice was calm. "Then they react." The chairman stared at him. "You are willing to risk everything." RM looked at the other 6. "We're willing to risk changing." He paused. "We're not willing to risk losing ourselves." The room was silent. Then the doors opened. A legal representative entered hurriedly. "Chairman." Everyone turned. He whispered something into the chairman's ear. The chairman's face changed. "What?" RM asked. The chairman looked at the 7 members. "The security investigation has found another leak." Suga sighed. "Of course." The chairman looked toward the screen. "This one contains a recording from this meeting." Everyone froze. "What?" Jimin whispered. "We haven't even finished." The chairman looked at the security representative. "When was it uploaded?" 3 minutes ago." J-Hope's face went pale, but nobody left the room. Suga looked around. Then someone inside the room sent it. Every person at the table became still. The security representative began checking devices. Phones were collected. Laptops were disconnected. The room erupted into accusations. "Nobody moves," someone shouted. Jimin looked at the 7 members. They stood together. Suddenly the lights went out. The room plunged into darkness. Someone screamed, chairs scraped, a phone fell. Then a sound came from the speaker system. Their own voices filled the room. Jimin heard himself from earlier. "Are we sure this is still us?" Then Suga's voice. "The problem is when success becomes the reason we stop making decisions." Then Yoongi, "I've been thinking about that too." The recording continued. But then another voice appeared. Voice none of them recognized. "If they refuse, proceed with phase 2. The room went silent. The lights returned. Everyone stared at the speaker. RM's face had gone white. That wasn't from today. The security representative looked at the system. "No," Suga stepped forward. "Play it again." The recording played. The unknown voice repeated the sentence. "If they refuse, proceed with phase 2. Jimin felt cold all over. "What is phase 2? Nobody answered. The chairman looked toward the strategy director. The strategy director looked terrified. "I don't know." Suga turned toward him. "You're lying." "I'm not." "Then why are you scared?" The director couldn't answer. RM looked at the chairman. "You know." The chairman remained silent. Jimin stepped forward. "Tell us." The chairman looked at him. "Phase 2 was never approved." "That's not what I asked." The chairman closed his eyes. "There was an earlier proposal." "What proposal?" "To separate the group's creative identities." Jimin felt his stomach drop. "Separate, not publicly." "Then what?" "Gradual individual positioning." Jin stared. "You mean turning us against each other?" "No, that's exactly what it means. It was intended to strengthen individual brands." Suga laughed bitterly. "And weaken the group." "That wasn't the intention." "Intentions don't matter when the result is the same." Jimin looked at the chairman. "Who proposed it?" The chairman didn't answer. RM asked again. "Who?" Finally, the chairman looked toward one person at the table. Everyone followed his gaze. The strategy director. The same man who had insisted that international audiences needed simpler cultural references. The same man whose department had created the expansion plan. The same man who had access to the leaked documents. He stood slowly. "This is absurd." Suga moved toward him. No, you leaked the files. No, you recorded us. No, you created phase 2. The director looked at the chairman. "Tell them." The chairman remained silent. The director's face collapsed. "You knew." The chairman looked away. Jimin's heart pounded. "You both knew." The director suddenly laughed. "You want the truth?" He looked at the 7 members. "The world changed." "So did we," RM said. "No," the director replied. "You changed too much." Jimin stared at him. "What?" "You became too powerful." The room went silent. "That's the truth." The director continued, his voice shaking. "You became artists who believed they could make decisions without the machinery that built your success." Suga's eyes narrowed. "We built this too. You think the company didn't. We know it did. Then why do you refuse to accept that the company has to protect the asset?" Jimin felt tears rise again. "Asset." The director looked at him. "Yes." Jimin nodded slowly. "There it is." The director stopped. Jimin's voice became almost a whisper. "That's why." "What?" "That's why you think we changed too much." He looked at the other members. "Because you stopped seeing us as people." The director shook his head. "That's emotional nonsense." "Maybe." Jimin wiped his eyes. "But it's still true." The chairman stood. "Enough." He looked at the strategy director. "You're suspended pending investigation." The director stared at him. "You can't." "Security." 2 people approached. The director struggled. "You think this ends here?" he shouted. "You think removing me changes anything?" He looked directly at Jimin. "You asked whether BTS was changing too much. You should ask what happens when the world decides it doesn't need BTS anymore." Jimin stared at him. "Then we'll find out." The director was escorted away. The boardroom doors closed. Nobody spoke. RM finally exhaled. "So phase 2 was real?" The chairman nodded. "Yes." "How long?" "Months." "And the restructuring?" "Connected." Jimin closed his eyes. He felt exhausted beyond words. "Why didn't you tell us?" The chairman looked at him. "Because we were afraid." Suga laughed softly. The chairman shook his head. "Of losing control." That answer hurt more than any accusation. RM nodded slowly. Then maybe this is where we stop. Stop what? The chairman asked, trying to control everything. The chairman looked at the 7 members. What do you want? RM looked at the others. Jimin nodded, Jungkook nodded, Taehyung nodded, J-Hope nodded, Jin smiled faintly. Suga simply said, freedom. The chairman stared at them. That's a dangerous word. Jimin smiled through tears. So is honesty. They left the boardroom together. Outside, cameras were still flashing. Reporters shouted questions. Security surrounded them. But this time Jimin didn't lower his head. He looked directly toward the cameras. Someone shouted, Jimin, are you fighting with management? Jimin stopped. RM looked at him. Jimin took a breath. We're fighting for the right to decide who we become. The crowd erupted. Jungkook grabbed his arm. Was that okay? Jimin laughed softly. No idea. Suga smiled. Good. They continued walking. Behind them, the boardroom doors remained closed. Ahead of them waited a world that would dissect every word they had said. But for once, Jimin wasn't terrified of being misunderstood. He had asked the question because he was afraid of losing BTS. Now he understood that the answer would never come from a boardroom, a chart, a strategy document, or a headline. It would come from the choices they made when nobody could guarantee success. That evening they returned to the studio. No executives, no strategy team, no cameras, just the 7 of them. The unfinished song waited on the screen. Jimin pressed play. The opening breath filled the room. Jungkook closed his eyes. Taehyung smiled. J-Hope began tapping the rhythm. Jin whispered the first line. Suga opened his notebook. RM leaned toward the microphone. Jimin stood in the center. Again, he said, they started. This time, nobody asked whether the world would understand. Nobody asked whether it would chart. Nobody asked whether it was safe. They asked only whether it was honest. And when the final note faded into silence, the 7 remained exactly where they were, together. Not unchanged, not perfect, not certain, but still choosing each other. Outside, the world was already arguing about them. Inside, they were making the next version of themselves. And for the first time, that felt less like losing BTS and more like finally giving BTS permission to live. Play it one more time. Jimin's voice was barely audible, but every member in the studio heard him. The room had been silent for nearly a minute since the last note of the unfinished song disappeared from the speakers. No one moved. The waveform remained frozen on the monitor, a thin line of sound trapped inside a rectangle of light. Outside the studio windows, Seoul had become a sea of midnight reflections, headlights sliding across wet streets like streams of liquid silver. Inside, 7 men sat scattered across couches, chairs, equipment cases, and the floor, exhausted after the most frightening day they could remember. The board meeting had ended hours earlier. The strategy director had been suspended. The existence of the secret restructuring plan had become undeniable. Their statement about creative control had already begun circulating online. The world was waiting for an explanation. Their company was preparing for another meeting in the morning. Investors were asking questions. News outlets were speculating about a possible internal collapse. Fans were arguing across every platform imaginable. And yet Jimin wanted to hear the song again. Suga stared at him for a moment before pressing the button. The first sound emerged, breathing, 7 breaths, uneven, human. Then silence. Then a quiet Korean phrase spoken by Jimin, so soft that it almost sounded like someone whispering to themselves in an empty room. Taehyung's voice followed. Jungkook entered after him. J-Hope's rhythm appeared beneath them. Jin's guitar came slowly into focus. RM's voice arrived like another layer of thought. Suga's production held everything together without announcing itself. The song wasn't polished, it wasn't finished. There were imperfections everywhere, a breath too loud, a note slightly unstable, a pause that lasted longer than a commercial producer would probably allow. But when the final note disappeared, nobody spoke. Jin finally leaned back. I still don't know if it's good. J-Hope laughed quietly. That's because you have no idea what good means. I know exactly what good means. You say that about everything, because I'm usually right. Suga shook his head. He's not. Jin looked offended. Whose side are you on? The songs. Jin stared at him. Traitor. A small laugh moved through the room. It was the first normal sound they had made all night. Then Jungkook said, I think it's honest. Everyone looked at him. He stared at the monitor. Maybe that's enough. RM nodded. Maybe. Jimin leaned forward, but now we have a problem. Suga raised an eyebrow. Only one, Jimin smiled faintly. A big one. The board, Jimin shook his head. The song. What about it? If we release it now, everyone will assume it's a response to the controversy. J-Hope frowned. It is a response to the controversy. Not exactly. Jimin looked at the others. We started writing it before we knew how bad things were. RM understood immediately. So if we release it now, people will interpret every line as a statement. Yes, Jin sighed. They already interpret the way we breathe. Taehyung laughed softly. He's not wrong. Jimin looked at the waveform. I don't want the song to become evidence in an argument. Suga nodded slowly. That's the risk. Jungkook leaned forward. Then don't release it. Everyone looked at him. What? Jungkook shrugged. If we aren't ready, don't. Jimin stared at him. But then what? Keep making it. And the controversy. Let it burn itself out. RM shook his head. It won't. Maybe not. Jungkook looked at him, but we don't have to feed it. Suga leaned back. He's right about one thing. RM looked at him. Which? We're reacting too much. Jimin frowned. To what? Everything. Suga pointed toward their phones. The headlines, the leaks, the board, the fans, the company, the market. We're letting every external event dictate our next move. He looked at the 7 of them. Maybe the most rebellious thing we can do is stop reacting. Jin smiled. That sounds very philosophical. I'm tired. That too. Jimin laughed softly, but then his phone vibrated. He looked down, a message from management. Emergency press conference scheduled for tomorrow morning. His smile disappeared. They want us at a press conference. RM took his phone. When? 9. That's in 6 hours. Yes. J-Hope groaned. I haven't slept. Jin raised his hand. Neither have I. You fell asleep during the board meeting. I was resting my eyes. Suga laughed. You were snoring. I do not snore. You absolutely snore. The room briefly filled with laughter again, but RM remained serious. We need to decide what we're going to say. Jimin shook his head. No. RM looked at him. No, I don't want a script. Neither do I. Then we shouldn't write one. We need structure. Jimin stared at him. Why? Because 7 people answering questions without a plan could become chaos. Maybe chaos is honest. RM smiled faintly. That's exactly what I'm afraid of. Jimin lowered his eyes. I'm sorry. For what? For putting you in this position. RM's expression softened. You didn't. I asked the first question, and we all answered. But everything exploded after that. RM walked over and sat beside him. Jimin, listen to me. Jimin looked up. You didn't destroy anything. Feels like I did. No, RM shook his head. You exposed something that was already there. Jimin's eyes filled with tears. What if I hadn't asked? Then maybe we'd still be comfortable. RM paused. Comfortable isn't always safe. Jimin looked away. I know. Do you? RM smiled gently. Because sometimes I think you still blame yourself for everything that happened. Jimin didn't answer. RM continued. You didn't leak the documents. You didn't create the restructuring plan. You didn't record the meeting. You didn't decide to treat us like assets. Jimin whispered, but I opened the door. No, RM shook his head. You opened the conversation. He put a hand on Jimin's shoulder. There is a difference. Jimin nodded slowly. Across the room, Jungkook watched them. His eyes were tired. He looked at Taehyung. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we had never become famous? Taehyung considered the question. Sometimes. What do you imagine? A quiet life. Jungkook smiled. Doing what? Maybe photography. You'd still be famous. Why? Because you can't take a picture without making people emotional. Taehyung laughed. That's not how photography works. It is for you. What about you? Taehyung asked. Jungkook thought for a moment. Music. Still, always. Taehyung nodded. Me too. J-Hope overheard them. You know what I would do? Everyone looked at him. Dance. Jin laughed. Obviously. No, I mean without cameras. J-Hope smiled. Just dance. Suga looked at him. You'd still be good. Maybe, J-Hope shrugged, but nobody would know. Jin smiled. I'd eat. That's not a career. It could be. No, food critic. You'd eat everything and give everything 5 stars. Exactly. The room laughed. Even RM smiled. For a moment the pressure seemed to disappear. Then Jimin looked around and realized something. These were the moments he was afraid of losing, not the stages, not the awards, not the numbers, the stupid jokes, the arguments, the way Jin could make everyone laugh when they were exhausted. The way Suga pretended not to care but noticed everything. The way RM carried worries he rarely discussed. The way J-Hope could turn silence into rhythm. The way Taehyung could make a strange observation that somehow became profound. The way Jungkook could still become excited about a melody like he was hearing music for the first time. And maybe that was why the controversy hurt so much. They weren't fighting over a product. They were fighting over the right to remain human inside something that had become enormous. The next morning, the press conference began at 9. By 8:30, the room was overflowing. Reporters stood shoulder to shoulder. Cameras filled every available space. Screens displayed the group's name. Every major outlet had sent representatives. Questions were already circulating online. Is BTS breaking up? Did the members reject management's international strategy? Was Jimin's comment the beginning of an internal rebellion? Will BTS release music in English only? Did the company secretly plan to separate the members? The 7 members entered together. The room erupted. Jimin felt his heartbeat pounding in his ears. They sat behind the long table. RM took the microphone. "Thank you for coming." The room quieted slightly. "We know there are many questions." A reporter immediately shouted, "Are the reports true that BTS is fighting with management?" RM paused. "We disagree with certain decisions." Another reporter shouted, "Does that mean you're leaving?" RM shook his head. "No." "Then are you staying?" "Yes." Under the current structure, RM looked at the others. "That's what we're discussing." Another voice cut through the room. "Jimin, did you cause this conflict by questioning the group's international direction?" Jimin took a breath. He could feel hundreds of cameras pointing toward him. He reached for the microphone. "I asked a question." The room became silent. "I asked whether we were changing too much for international success because I was afraid of losing something." "What? Ourselves?" A murmur moved through the room. Jimin continued. "I didn't ask because I hate international success. I didn't ask because I think changing is wrong. I asked because I believe we should have a choice in how we change." A reporter shouted, "So you oppose English songs?" "No." "Western collaborations?" "No." "International producers?" "No." "Then what exactly are you opposing?" Jimin looked directly toward the cameras. "The idea that international success requires us to become less Korean, less personal, or less ourselves." The room erupted with questions. RM raised his hand. "One at a time." Another reporter shouted, "Are you accusing the company of trying to erase BTS's identity?" Jimin hesitated. Then Suga reached for his microphone. "There were plans that concerned us," the reporter pressed. "What plans?" Suga looked at RM. RM nodded. Suga continued. "There were proposals to centralize creative decisions and reduce member control over certain projects." Gasps moved through the room. "Are you saying the company tried to control your music?" "There were proposals," Suga repeated. "They were not finalized." Another reporter shouted, "Did the company treat you like products?" Jin took the microphone. "Sometimes documents can make people sound like numbers." He paused. "But we're still people." J-Hope looked down. Taehyung's eyes became wet. Jungkook reached for his water. Another reporter shouted, "Jungkook, do you feel controlled?" Jungkook looked at the microphone for several seconds. Then he said, "Sometimes." The room fell silent. He continued, "But I don't think control is always intentional. Sometimes people think they're protecting you." "Were you protected?" Jungkook looked at RM, then at Jimin. "Sometimes." "And now?" Jungkook took a breath. "Now I want to participate in deciding what I'm protected from." Jimin looked at him. That sentence would become a headline before the press conference even ended. The questions became more aggressive. Some reporters accused them of ingratitude. One asked whether their success had made them arrogant. Another asked whether the members were using the controversy to gain more personal power. Suga's expression hardened. "We wanted power, we wouldn't be asking for creative responsibility. We'd be asking for control over everything. Isn't that what you're doing?" "No," Suga leaned forward. "We're asking not to be removed from decisions about our own work." Another reporter shouted, "But your company built your global platform." Suga nodded. "Yes." "Then why shouldn't they decide? Because building a platform doesn't mean owning the person standing on it." The room erupted again. RM closed his eyes briefly. Jimin could see the headlines writing themselves. Then a reporter asked the question nobody expected. "Jimin, do you regret asking whether BTS is changing too much?" Jimin stared at the microphone. His hands trembled. He could have given a safe answer. He could have said he was sorry for causing confusion. He could have said everything was fine. He could have repeated a prepared phrase about gratitude and teamwork. Instead, he looked at the other six. Jin nodded. J-Hope smiled. Taehyung gave him a tiny thumbs up. Jungkook squeezed his knee beneath the table. Suga simply watched him. RM waited. Jimin turned back toward the cameras. No, the room fell silent. I don't regret asking. His voice was steady now. I regret that I was afraid to ask sooner. The sentence hung in the room. Jimin continued. I think every group, every artist, every company, every person who grows should eventually ask what they're becoming. Not because growth is bad. Because growth without reflection can turn into something you didn't choose. His eyes filled with tears, but he didn't look away. If asking that question causes discomfort, then maybe the question was necessary. Nobody moved. Then a reporter asked, so what happens now? Jimin smiled faintly. We keep making music. Under the company's strategy. Under our own judgment, together with the people we trust. Does that mean the song you've been working on will be released? Jimin looked at RM. RM looked at the others. Then Jimin answered. We don't know yet. The press conference ended 30 minutes later. As the seven walked backstage, their phones began exploding with notifications. Headlines appeared instantly. Jimin refuses to apologize. Jungkook admits feeling controlled. Suga Delivers stunning response. BTS Demands creative freedom. Jimin stared at the screen. This is going to be insane. Jin looked over his shoulder. It already is. J-Hope laughed nervously. My mother is going to call. Mine too, Jungkook said. Taehyung checked his phone. Mine already did. What did she say? Jin asked. Taehyung smiled. She told me to eat. Jin nodded. Wise woman. They laughed. But the laughter stopped when RM's phone rang. Answered. Hello. His expression changed. What? He listened. Are you sure? The members looked at him. Send it to me. He hung up. What? Suga asked. RM looked at them. The original plan was not created by the strategy director. Everyone froze. What? Jimin asked. Security traced the earliest version. RM took a breath. It was created almost a year ago. By whom? Jin asked. RM stared at the floor. A committee that included people from inside and outside the company. Who? J-Hope asked. RM hesitated. Several international partners. Suga frowned. Partners. Yes, so the plan was bigger than the company, apparently. Jimin felt a chill. Then who started the idea of separating our creative identities? RM looked at him. We don't know yet. Suga swore under his breath. This isn't over. RM shook his head. No, Jimin looked at the others. Then maybe we need to stop trying to find the enemy. Everyone looked at him. What? Jimin continued. Maybe we're asking the wrong question again. Suga frowned. What do you mean? We're assuming there has to be one person behind everything. Jimin looked at the hallway. Maybe it's a system. RM's eyes widened slightly. Jimin continued. Maybe nobody woke up one morning and decided to destroy BTS. Maybe 100 small decisions were made because everyone thought they were protecting success. J-Hope nodded slowly. And together they became something dangerous. Exactly. Jimin looked at the seven of them. Then fighting one person won't fix it. RM understood. We need to change the system. Suga smiled faintly. Now you're thinking like me. Jimin laughed. That's terrifying. It should be. They returned to the studio that night. The song was still there, but now it felt different. They listened again. This time, Jimin heard not only their voices, but everything they had survived to reach that moment. The first note carried years of uncertainty. The second carried exhaustion. The third carried anger. The chorus carried hope. When the song ended, RM looked at everyone. We should finish it. J-Hope nodded. Yes. Jin smiled. Absolutely. Taehyung sat at the piano. Jungkook put on his headphones. Suga opened the project file. Jimin stepped toward the microphone. Ready? Jungkook smiled. No, Jimin laughed. Good. Why good? Because that's how we always started. Jin shouted from the couch. I heard that. Everyone laughed. Then the recording began. This time, Jimin didn't try to hide the crack in his voice. Jungkook didn't chase perfection. Taehyung let a strange breath remain in the bridge. J-Hope kept an imperfect rhythmic sound because he liked the texture. Jin's guitar string buzzed slightly during one chord. Suga didn't remove it. RM changed a lyric at the last second. Nobody stopped him. They were making decisions again. their decisions. Hours later, the final version was complete. They listened in silence. Then RM whispered, "Should we release it?" Everyone looked at Jimin. He shook his head. "Not because of the controversy." "Then why?" Jimin smiled. "Because it's ready." Suga looked at him. "That's a better reason." The song was scheduled for release without an elaborate campaign. No teaser designed to manipulate speculation. No mysterious countdown. No strategic statement about market positioning. Just the song. When midnight arrived, they pressed the button together. The file went live. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then notifications began appearing. Thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, the song spread. Reactions came from Korea, Japan, the United States, Europe, Southeast Asia, Latin America, and countless places they couldn't immediately identify. Some listeners understood every word, some understood none. Some translated the lyrics, some asked questions, some cried, some criticized it, some loved it, some hated it. But something unexpected happened. People began discussing the meaning instead of the controversy. Fans posted translations. Others talked about the Korean phrases. Some listeners said they didn't understand the words but felt the emotion. Others wrote about learning more because they wanted to understand. Jimin watched the comments with tears in his eyes. "Look," Jungkook leaned over. "What?" "Someone said they want to learn Korean because of the first verse." Taehyung smiled. "See," Jimin laughed through tears. "We didn't make it easier." Suga nodded. "We made it ours." Then the numbers began climbing. The song reached the top of several charts within hours. International streams surged. Korean listeners embraced it. Critics praised its vulnerability. Even some analysts who had argued for the original international strategy admitted that the song was succeeding precisely because it refused to flatten the group's identity. The company called an emergency meeting. This time, the members arrived together. The chairman stood when they entered. "Congratulations." Jimin smiled politely. "Thank you." The chairman looked at the numbers. "The song exceeded expectations." Suga smiled. "That's nice." The chairman looked at them. "I owe you an apology." Nobody expected that. He continued. "We became so focused on protecting success that we forgot why success existed." RM nodded. "Thank you for saying that." The chairman took a breath. "The restructuring proposal has been withdrawn." Jungkook exhaled. J-Hope closed his eyes. Jin smiled. Taehyung looked at Jimin. Suga simply nodded. "And?" RM asked. The chairman looked at them. "Creative decisions will be made with member participation as a formal requirement." Jimin's eyes softened. "Not because we're demanding control, because you have earned the right to participate." Jimin shook his head. "We didn't earn it." The chairman looked at him. "What?" "It's not something we should have to earn." Silence. Jimin continued. "It's our work." The chairman nodded slowly. "You're right." The meeting ended without celebration. There was no dramatic handshake, no perfect apology. Some damage could not be repaired in one afternoon. Trust would take time, but something had shifted. Months later, the 7 members stood backstage before a major international concert. The arena outside was filled with thousands of lights. Fans shouted their names. The stage trembled with the sound of anticipation. Jimin stood behind the curtain listening. Jungkook approached him. "Nervous?" "Always." "Good." Jimin laughed. "You stole my line. I learned from you." Hyung joined them. "Are we ready?" J-Hope shouted from behind. "We've been ready for 10 minutes. Jin called. "I'm hungry," Suga laughed. RM looked at all of them. "One thing before we go." Everyone quieted. RM looked around. "Remember what we learned?" Jimin smiled. "Which part?" RM's eyes softened. "That changing isn't the enemy." Suga nodded. "Forgetting why we change is." J-Hope added, "And letting other people decide for us." Jin smiled. "And eating before concerts." Everyone laughed. Jungkook looked at Jimin. "Anything else?" Jimin thought for a moment. Then he said, "If we're ever scared to ask the question again," he looked at all 6, "ask it anyway." The stage manager called them. The lights dimmed. The crowd erupted. 7 silhouettes appeared behind the curtain. Jimin took one breath, then another. The curtain rose. Light flooded the stage. The audience screamed. Music began. The 7 moved together not because someone had engineered every emotion for them, but because they had chosen to stand there. They had changed. They were still changing. They would probably change again tomorrow. They would make mistakes. They would disagree. They would take risks. Some would work, some would fail. There would be new pressures, new markets, new expectations, new arguments, and new questions. But the fear that had once haunted Jimin no longer felt like a warning. It felt like a reminder. Growth was inevitable. Identity was not something they could preserve in glass. It had to breathe. It had to move. It had to survive mistakes. And perhaps most importantly, it had to remain a choice. Later that night after the concert, the seven sat together backstage. Sweat still covered their faces. Towels hung around their shoulders. Someone had ordered food. Jin was already eating. J-Hope was replaying a funny moment from the show. Taehyung was showing Jungkook a photograph he had taken from the stage. Suga was quietly listening to the crowd outside. RM sat beside Jimin. "You okay?" Jimin nodded. "Yeah, really, RM smiled. "Do you still wonder whether we're changing too much?" Jimin looked toward the stage entrance. Beyond it, thousands of lights were still glowing. "Yes," RM laughed softly. "You do, of course." And Jimin smiled. "I think that's okay." RM looked at him. "Why?" "Because as long as we keep asking, we'll keep choosing." RM nodded. Jimin looked around the room. 7 people, 7 lives, 1 history, a future nobody could predict. He smiled. Maybe that's all we needed. Outside, the crowd began chanting their name again. Jin shouted, "They're calling us." J-Hope laughed. "We just performed for 3 hours." "They want an encore," Jungkook said. Suga stood. "Of course they do." Taehyung smiled. "Let's go." One by one, they rose. Jimin stayed behind for a second. He looked at the empty chairs, the scattered towels, the half-finished bottles of water, the glowing stage beyond the curtain. He remembered the rehearsal room months earlier. The question, the fear, the leaked video, the boardroom, the accusations, the tears, the song, the first breath, the first note. He remembered thinking that BTS might be disappearing. Now he understood that they hadn't disappeared. They had simply reached another crossroads. He walked toward the others. Jungkook waited for him. Coming. Jimin smiled. Always. They stepped onto the stage together. The lights exploded above them. The crowd roared. 7 voices rose into the night. And somewhere beneath the enormous sound, beneath the lights, beneath the success that had once frightened them, there remained a simple truth that no strategy document could erase. They were still choosing each other. They were still choosing the music. They were still changing. And they were still BTS.